Hello fellow freaks. So as the majority of you all know, unless perhaps you've been living under a rock the past 2 weeks, which if that's the case then leave. You know, like most people, I was shocked and perplexed by the news. However, the thing is, prior to his passing, I wasn't really that much of a fan. I mean, I knew his works, I knew his name, obviously. Probably the most famous song that I knew of his was Dancing in the Street, which wasn't his own solo, it was like a collaboration with Mick Jagger, and Under Pressure with Queen, which I didn't even know he collaborated with them on until recently, as well as his most famous film role in the cult classic Labyrinth. So my familiarity with his work as a whole was really rather vague until I found out about the news of his passing. And it wasn't like I didn't want to know his work or was avoiding it. Well, I actually kind of was avoiding it. And I was avoiding it and kind of putting it off because of how of a discography he has. I mean, 25 albums and more. That was quite intimidating for me. So, as any half-rate chump like me would, after the passing of a great cultural icon, I finally decided to check out his work. And, you know, I started out, I think, rather modestly. I believe the first thing I did was probably read and watch every article, interview, any anecdotal pieces, album reviews regarding David Bowie. And then from there, I just decided to start listening to his music. I first started with some singles, such as Life on Mars and Space Oddity. And finally, at one point, I decided to actually take the leap and dive into his vast discography. I didn't really have any rhyme or reason as to my choosing necessarily in terms of where I would start my journey into his discography. The first album that I listened to was his Station to Station record, which intrigued me the most initially, given that it was an art rock and avant-garde music style. And then after that I listened to the entirety of the Berlin trilogy, and then, I don't know, it just spiraled from there, honestly. Something about it intrigued me enough that I listened to every album and song that I could, including rarities and projects that he had participated in prior to his solo career, and even early in his solo career. And there were some albums that I wasn't planning on listening to, but then I just decided to listen to anyway, and one thing led to another, and I listened to about 16 of his albums. Yep. Of his albums. Man, that's a lot of music by one singular artist. The thing was, though, with David Bowie, an artist similar to David Bowie, I didn't really mind because of the breadth of his artistic prowess and his ability to be as versatile and chameleonic in both his visual personas and his musical personas, and his style of dress and scenicity all made it all the more doable. I mean, I've listened to more of his albums than I have of Led Zeppelin, and Led Zeppelin's one of my favorite classic rock groups of all time. More of this, any other, at least popular artist, so to speak, popular, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it if this was Elton John's work, or Bruce Springsteen, or even Eric Clapton. No, that would not have been in the stars for me. That would have been pie in the sky for me to have to do that. And I can usually take listening to multiple entries of any one artist or group in one singular time. So, as you can tell, that wasn't really my intention to listen to as many albums as I did. And I thought about taking on the challenge and listening to his entire discography, but there's just some that I've seen from singles from his later work that it's kind of lackluster. sadly. Not entirely. I mean, there's still a lot of reinvention and experimentation on his later work, if not more so than as much as his earlier. And I tried to get into records like Black Tie White Noise and Earthling. Just didn't really do it for me. There are some records that I may likely never listen to, or at least in the nearest future listen to, such as, say, Black Star. I mean, I listened to the 2 singles from the record, but it's just such a dark and bittersweet swan song of a record, and I think it's incredibly commendable that he, as an artist, decided to take advantage of the opportunity presented to him in regards to the fact that he was dying. He decided to make his death his final project, in a way. And again, I think that's incredibly admirable. However, it's just, I don't listen to it. I don't want to be saddened by that. So I don't know if I'm ever going to listen to it. Maybe one day. But I'll have to listen to sillier, more quirky and generally lighthearted records in order to recover from that. Much like you would when recovering from a really intense horror film by watching Disney Princess movies. So that'll probably be my directive and my game plan for that. But other records that I already attempted to listen to in full that I mentioned earlier, or others that I hadn't even heard a track from, are still kind of up in the air. So we'll see. The journey's kind of never ending at this point. And with regard to all the music that I had listened to in all its totality, I wish I could give a proper review of them. Everything. But it's difficult to quantify that and really articulate that and how those records had impacted me just within the past week even. But I'll say this, it was a great experience. He's a wonderful artist and you can't really replace him. He was, everyone's been saying that he was practically an alien himself, almost near immortal. He was just out of this world in terms of art he produced and his influence on culture at large. And I think it's worth mentioning that I'm not necessarily the type of person who's particularly attracted to pop music in general. I mean, I kind of abhor it, honestly, and everything that it kind of stands for. And it's interesting to note, and actually really quite funny, that through this process of digging and delving into his various works, that I've actually discovered more artists than I have any artist of his caliber or his contemporaries. And it's funny because usually with pop artists, you just listen to them for the likability factor or something rather shallow or one-dimensional as that. Through him, I discovered Brian Eno, who I think is an excellent producer of electronic and ambient music, and I would arguably state that he invented post-rock. I would say that, honestly. And I say this because as I was listening to Moss Garden on Bowie's second record in the Berlin trilogy, Heroes, the flourishes and the drony aspects of that kind of musical style was uncanny to me. And this was before I knew that Brian, had collaborated artistically on that project. I thought that he was essentially an engineer or a record producer working on the technical aspects of the recording process. So I was unaware of the fact that he probably had actually created that piece himself. And because of that, I thought, is David Bowie inventing post-rock here? Is this why we have Godspeed the Black Emperor now? Or Sigur Rós? Or This Will Destroy You? What? Then I learned more about how often he would collaborate with Brian on this particular project and on future projects as well. And then I listened to some of, his personal projects, such as his album Ambient 1, Music for Airports, which, according to good old Wikipedia, was, and I quote, designed to be continuously looped as a sound installation with the intent of diffusing the tense, anxious atmosphere of an airport terminal. Which, according to that source, I know is infamously unreliable. However, it said that this was like the first project to officially state itself as an ambient style of music. which I thought was really quite innovative, especially for that time. And then other artists that I also discovered through David Bowie also include those who had also collaborated with him, were influenced by his work, or were generally along the same stylistic vein. Artists such as Kraftwerk, New, and Iggy Pop, who I'd also heard of before but didn't really take the time to check into his work until now, which I'm glad I did, in contrast with my exposure to David Bowie's work. And so prior and then after I had had my fill with this whole musical journey, I decided to check into his other artistic endeavors, such as his filmography. Prior to the whole thing, I watched Labyrinth with a few friends, which is an amazing film. But I just saw last night his role in the 1976 sci-fi drama The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is a great film by all meanings of the word. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, though, so if you do plan to watch it, do prepare yourself, as it were. Last night I discovered as well that he had also been in a number of other films and TV media, such as Twin Peaks, which I've already started viewing and wasn't aware that he was a part of that project. So this is just more motivation for me to actually continue on with the show, which I've kind of been laxing on. And as well, his other film entries in, sorry if I'm butchering this, but Basquait, The Prestige, as well as Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. All four of those I do plan to watch post this production of this little vlog, as it were. And I'm planning on watching it prior, but I figured y'all would get the gist of how this whole experience has affected me, given that I've generally inundated myself with his various works. I'm a little buoyed out, to say the least, but it's been fun. Truly, I don't regret it, and if I were to do it again, I would probably take the opportunity to look at his work prior to this point, so I'm not just one of those people who generally looks into artistic individuals' work until after they've passed. So I'm kind of a plebe in that way, but what are you gonna do? You know, nothing. Nothing. And of course, my thoughts go out to his family, close friends, and associates. They're mourning, obviously, much more than any of the people in the public are. So I hope they're healing well and they're able to get through this, because we all, especially them, lost a great figure that one unfortunate day. And on the subject of such a great figure, I feel like as a result of this experience, I obviously, as one would, doing something similar to as how I did, I have a much better and clearer and really rather profound understanding of the person, at least the public presentation of David Bowie, and what his art meant to him, and really much more than I ever would before, really commend him and respect him for his uncompromising commitments to his artistic choices and decisions and the way he lived his life, and how his art was his life's work, even to the end, as I had mentioned earlier. You know, his death was very much in likeness to his life, rather unpredictable. So it really wasn't out of character, but it was a shock and a tremor nonetheless. But what he brought to the table in terms of his art is just astounding and really rather inspiring. Everything about who he was really rather is. So we have that to be thankful for, and again, how wide and varied his amount of work was is something to also be thankful for, because then we can look back at it with much better adoration and hopefully a much fuller appreciation. And you know, prior to this, I thought Jared Leto was a really versatile artist, and he is. In his own right, he is. But I mean, it goes without saying, David Bowie was the OG chameleon. Let's be real. That's my video. thank you for watching. As aforementioned, I do plan to continue on with this little trek of mine, see where else it takes me. Probably not going to go as thoroughly into it since, again, I just feel so washed out at this point with all the work that I've just exposed myself to. It may take a little break, but we'll see. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video, and I guess I should say thank you to Mr. Bowie. Probably can't hear this, but whatever. Thank you for all your work and everything. It's been great. Glad we crossed paths in our existence. That was pretty dope. See you in the sky, Starman. Farewell, everyone, and...